One of the things that we have been watching with interest and perhaps fascination, Mr. Brian Weedeye, is
Hmm.
this fall's upcoming game, NBA 2K16, and in particular, a story mode that Spike Lee is helping to or is completely creating, crafting on his own, at least the narrative aspect of it. And recently, some information came out about that, which there has been very little officially announced about it. Brian, some interesting facts were present in a rather unconventional way to find out
Yeah.
this kind of information.
Yeah. So Spike Lee's being framed as basically the driving force behind the new My Career Mode story, writer and director. So what people thought when this news first broke was, okay, we might be getting a grittier, kind of more grounded and realistic story mode, which to most people, or at least to me, sounded encouraging. Now, the extent of which that could go is a big question because, for obvious reasons, Entertainment Software Ratings Board, also known as the ESRB, they rate the games and they label them. You see them on every game, whether it's E for everyone or T for teen or M for mature. Or there's a few others, but they basically classify these games, and it can be restrictive in who can then purchase the game or as a guide to parents. So sports games typically are E for everyone.
Yep.
This one, NBA 2K16, the first hint we got that something more was happening with this career mode was that they rated it E10 plus, which means it's supposedly appropriate for anyone over 10. But we didn't really have any details on it. Now we do, because ESRB put out they always have a brief explanation of why a certain game got a certain rating. And for 2Ks, they mention a number of things here, which includes accidental deaths of characters, some suggestive dialogue. And I need to talk about one of these specifically later because I did a little more research on it. And things like jumping in front of a train and some sexual related comments and some alcohol-related comments. So we'll get into it more there, but that's basically what we're looking at here is a mode that will have a story that's not R-rated, but it's not going to be G or probably really PG rated either. And it falls into a zone where I'm not sure that's a good thing for anybody, because if it was me and I wanted an R-rated type mode like Fight Night Champion, which was rated M, go all the way, go for it, do it. But if you're going to try to appeal to a wide audience and every demographic with NBA 2K like they are doing, they're kind of eliminating a certain segment of people from being able to enjoy this mode, or even like parents who will be uncomfortable maybe playing the mode in front of their children, not even their children playing it, but it creates those certain conflicts. And Rich, you are a parent. I am not, but you are a parent, and certainly I think these things probably enter your mind.
They definitely do. It's very interesting. Obviously, we still don't know any real context of what's happening here. So this is all conjecture. But at the same time, I mean, we've been sort of wondering both, on this show and in other places, sort of how this would come together, right? Like, because there have long been complaints about the sanitary nature of sports games these days because of the heavy relationship that these games have with the leagues that produce them, and understandably so. The leagues really want to focus any attention away from things that could be perceived as negative and focus as much as they can on events on the field. Yet unless you're really, really, really good, it can be difficult to tell a story without introducing elements that may not be appropriate for a mass audience, particularly when you're talking about something like basketball, right? I mean, we all know, the people who play basketball come from all parts of the world, right? But I mean, they're all adults. There's money, there is fame, There are often, difficult backgrounds that some of these players come from, like those.
Sure.
So to tell any sort of a story that has a semblance of realism, it's almost impossible not to inject some elements that may be objectionable, right? So I completely get that. On the other hand, part of me sort of wishes that we could at least have something that doesn't have to have those kinds of things in it. And really it comes down to, yes, I'm a parent of an 8-year-old. And while my 8-year-old is not going to play NBA 2K16, I know there are hundreds of thousands of 8-year-olds who would love to, right? My son just doesn't happen to be a big sports video game fan right now. But I just wonder, like, is this the kind of thing that you want to add on to the pile? Is this the right setting for something like this? I have no issue with it per se. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, can't do this, it's a bad idea. But it, like you say, it as, if without seeing it, but just thinking of it out loud, I definitely would like, I don't play M-rated games with my kid in the room at all. And while this is an M, E10 Plus is a very big difference. It definitely, I just kind of, I'm a little uneasy sort of about this, and would definitely have to sort of, think 2 or 3 times, play through it a little bit before I'd have it around my kid. Whereas, any other sports game I ever play, my son is often in the room watching me, play a baseball game or a football game. So it's uncertainty. It's more of a bit of a feeling of, does this also have to have that element? But again, at the same time, I completely understand that telling a story, not every story can just be rainbows and unicorns, and you're going to have stuff that is going to be something other than rated G.
Yeah, and one of the biggest complaints with MyCareer, with the story over the last 2 years, has been that the dialogue is corny and unrealistic.
Yep.
And the storylines are silly and unrealistic and over the top. And so you knew Spike Lee coming in would change that. But looking at the examples that are laid out here, these sound corny to me too, right? Has anyone in the history of the planet referred to their car as an aphrodisiac for hotties? I don't know. Probably, maybe not. But
when not my car, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. But I went just out of curiosity, and I Googled the phrase "thirsty hotties," okay, which is mentioned in here, specifically mentioned thirsty hotties. I Googled that, and every single link that was returned was to a porn video.
Oh boy!
So I mean, this is kind of, and I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that. So, are they associating themselves with something here? Even if that phrase is not bad on its own, it's almost a little sketchy as it is. Just like you would think they might do a little research on where some of these things lead, especially. But that's maybe that's not going to stand out when you watch it in the story. It just stands out because we're looking at it in this description. But it's a little risky when you start associating yourselves with those things.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I understand that interesting things sometimes need to push boundaries, right? I have no problem with pushing a boundary. It'll be fascinating to see where this goes. The audience is wide for NBA 2K. So that's really, you use the word risk. I think it's a good point, right? I mean, nobody to this point has ever had a problem, I think, going and picking up an NBA 2K game. And I would imagine also that the Spike Lee story is going to be pretty heavily marketed. So, I mean, I believe it already is, right? So
it's pretty much all they've marketed so far.
Yeah. So again, you're getting into a very interesting scenario. Well, how is this going to be marketed? Is it going to be marketed as sort of a gritty, basketball, soap opera, basically? Something like that?
Yeah, along the lines of a He God game, right? Which would be way, they couldn't go that far, obviously, but they'd like to keep it that grounded sense. I think at least that's what you would expect.
Yeah, and maybe we're giving, you know, too many people too much credit. You know, we all know, we've all been at the movie, right? The R-rated movie, the horror film, or the, you know, the the movie that is wildly inappropriate, and in walks the parent with the 2 or 3 kids. You know, like,
Yeah.
so, you know, we might be we might be overestimating the parenting capabilities of some folks when it comes to this stuff. But on the other hand, you know, it definitely does. You know, it definitely does, you know, is the risk really, it's risk reward, right? It's, will we appeal to a wider group of people by introducing this? Whereas perhaps some folks might be a little wary, the people that would be interested would be larger. And I would imagine, based upon what we're finding out, that they've done the analysis, and to the best of their abilities, they're going wider, even if it means perhaps not necessarily having the complete, you know, family market available. You know, the upside they feel is better than, you know, the downside.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if they would certainly lose any sales right off the bat. The question would be, you know, do parents find this to be objectionable later on when they see their kids playing it or hear about it,
right?
And then they say, you know, no, this is inappropriate, and then they just like swear off the series or whatever. You know, we're probably, you know, over-examining just because of this information, the impact that it's going to have. But there is an impact to I think, and it's going to be interesting to see, because again, I think that the issue is they're going to take it a little farther than what they have in the past. But is that going to satisfy the people who want that grittier experience? Because they're not going to go as far as an R-rated movie that you would expect from a Spike Lee. But you just hope that it's a little more, at least for me, a little more realistic in its representations of people and scenarios. And we'll just have to see how that works out.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm personally hoping for, you know, we mentioned this a couple of times, I believe, is how I would like this mode to be short. Like, I always get pretty far into the, you know, MyCareer Mode, but after a couple of seasons, new games come out, things happen, and I never take it all the way to the end, because you play 82 games and playoffs, and then there's practices that are dropped in and beneath, and so on. So I'm also hoping that, you know, they're really, you know, if it is truly being the story, it really is kind of a story, and it can be shrunk and experienced in, you know, 2, 4, 6, 8 hours, something where it's not completely open-ended too. So again, we have no idea whether that's the case, but it will be very interesting as we know, we get closer and ultimately find out, you know, is this just, you know, My Player or MyCareer Mark III, where it's got some grittier elements sprinkled in, but you still play every single game? Is it almost like Fight Night Champion, which has elements of the game, but much more a story? And then what does that story entail? How much freedom do you have to do different things? What's happening? I mean, clearly you're going to have relationships with people. Some people are going to die. You know, like, there's some stuff going on here. Which,
serious stuff for a basketball game, man.
Serious stuff for a basketball game. So it's really fascinating, you know, how this is all going to come together.